Я твой слуга, я твой работник.
Have you ever wondered why Kraftwerk, the band that basically invented modern electronic music, kept their studio location a total secret for over 50 years? No visitors, no phone that actually rang, letters sent back unopened. Even their closest collaborators were told to call at exact pre-arranged minutes or forget it. That place was called Kling Klang. To the outside world, it looked like a myth, a hidden laboratory where four guys in suits built robot voices, endless loops, and the soundtrack to the future. But behind those locked doors, the reality was wilder, darker, and a lot more human than anyone expected. Tonight, we're going inside, not with rumors or recycled Wikipedia facts, but with the stories ex-members only started telling once they walked away for good. Some of it is mind-blowing, some of it is messy. All of it actually happened. Let's start at the very beginning, when Kling Klang was nothing more than an empty room and a crazy idea. Back in 1970, Kling Klang didn't look like the futuristic nerve center you probably imagine. It was just a bare, dusty loft tucked inside an old factory building on Mintrapstrasse in Düsseldorf. No neon lights, no glowing consoles, just cracked concrete floors and a single power outlet that barely worked. The wall on one side was shared with painter Gerhard Richter's atelier, so sometimes you'd hear brushes scraping while Ralf and Florian were trying to coax strange noises out of homemade circuits. They moved in because rent was cheap and the neighbors didn't care how loud it got at 3 in the morning. At first, there was almost nothing there. A couple of Farfisa organs, a battered tape echo, and an early EMS Synthi A that cost more than most people made in a year. Ralf later joked that the first special effect they ever used was the building's elevator shaft. They'd drop metal chains down it and record the crash from the bottom. But here's what most people miss. Those early sessions weren't planned masterpieces. The guys would bring in stacks of newspapers, spread them across the floor, and pick random headlines to turn into melodies. Vietnam, stock market crash, moon landing, whatever caught their eye became a rhythm or a drone. They recorded everything on a battered Revox tape machine, then spent hours slicing the tape with razor blades, looping tiny fragments until something hypnotic emerged. By 1975, after the surprise success of Autobahn, the money finally rolled in. That's when Kling Klang transformed overnight. Custom synths built by outsiders Matten and Weechers started arriving, weird machines with no keyboards, just patch cables and blinking lights. They installed heavy soundproof doors that locked from the inside, and suddenly the playful loft became a fortress. The rule was simple. Nobody outside the core four ever crossed that threshold again. Not journalists, not girlfriends, not even the guy who delivered the coffee beans. And that's when the real mystery began. Because once those doors closed for good, the stories that leaked out started to sound less like a band and more like a cult with synthesizers. But the tighter Ralf pulled the reins, the more the others started to wonder whose dream this really was. By the late 70s, Kling Klang wasn't just a place to record, it had become a private universe with its own laws. The phone in the hallway had a ringer, but it was permanently switched off. If you needed to reach them, Ralf or Florian would give you an exact day and minute to call. Miss that window by 30 seconds, and the line would just go dead. Letters arrived almost daily from fans, labels, even David Bowie once, and every single envelope was stamped "Return to Sender, unopened." The band claimed it kept the energy pure. Former members later said it kept everyone else out. Inside, the gear was growing faster than most countries' space programs. They had custom vocoders that could make a human voice sound like a dial tone, sequencers built into flight cases the size of refrigerators, and a robotic drum kit that could play perfect 16th notes for 12 hours straight without drifting a millisecond. Wolfgang Flür once bragged they could trigger an entire song with one button, then admitted Ralf sometimes left the machines running alone for days just to see what would happen. The real mind-blower was how portable it all became. After the 1976 tour, Ralf decided Kling Klang had to travel with them. Engineers welded everything into wheeled racks painted matte black. Load-in looked like a military operation. 4 identical flight cases, each holding a complete member station, rolled on stage in under 10 minutes. The robots you saw during The Robots in 1981? Those weren't always dummies. Sometimes a band member would slip backstage mid-song, trigger the mannequin, and let it finish the set while he grabbed a coffee. The audience never noticed. But the same secrecy that protected their sound started choking the people making it. Karl Bartos remembers sessions where they'd spend an entire week moving one hi-hat 2 millimeters left in the stereo field because Ralf heard a phase issue nobody else could detect. Disagreement wasn't encouraged, it was quietly ignored until you stopped bringing it up. One by one, the others realized the machines weren't the only things being programmed. The walls were soundproof, sure, but they also worked the other way. Hardly anyone heard the arguments building up inside. Until one day, the pressure finally found a crack. By the early 80s, everyone outside the building still thought Kraftwerk was 4 equal pioneers steering the ship together. Inside Kling Klang, the truth was simpler. Ralf Hütter had quietly become the only captain. Florian was the dreamy inventor who'd disappear for days tinkering with flutes and violins. Wolfgang and Karl handled rhythm and precision, but every final decision looped back to Ralf. And Ralf had started treating the studio like his personal laboratory, where time didn't matter and perfection was the only acceptable result. Karl Bartos later described weeks that felt like prison. They'd arrive at 10 in the morning, drink 1 exact cup of coffee each, Ralf measured the beans, then sit in near silence while Ralf listened to the same 8-bar loop on repeat for 6, 7, sometimes 9 hours. If Karl suggested a new melody, Ralf would nod politely, play the loop another 50 times, then say, "Interesting," and move on exactly as before. Bartos once counted an entire month spent adjusting the brightness of one oscillator by fractions of a volt. Nothing else got recorded. The obsession spilled into everything. Ralf became fixated on cycling, hundreds of kilometers every week, and conversations that weren't about gear or bicycles simply dried up. Wolfgang Flür remembers trying to talk about normal life, family, holidays, anything human, and getting blank stares. "We weren't allowed feelings in there," he said years later, "only voltage." The cruelest part? When someone finally left, Ralf erased them. Album credits got rewritten, photos were retouched, literally airbrushed in the pre-Photoshop days, until the departed member vanished. Tour programs from the 90s show 4 silhouettes, but if you look closely at the original negatives, you can still spot the faint outline where a face used to be. Ex-members started calling it cultural Stalinism with a beat. People on the outside thought the long gaps between albums were artistic choice. Inside, they were symptoms of one man's endless quest for a sound that only existed in his head, and the slow realization from everyone else that they were just temporary guests in that vision. Then, in the spring of 1982, something happened that almost ended the whole experiment in one brutal second. May 1982. Ralf Hütter was 40 kilometers into one of his usual solo rides along the Rhine when a car clipped him from behind. Helmet cracked, skull fractured, he spent days in a coma and weeks unable to speak properly. Doctors told Florian the damage might be permanent. Nobody knew if Ralf would ever play again, let alone ride a bike. While he lay in intensive care, the rest of the band sat in Kling Klang staring at half-finished tracks for an album they had already titled Technopop. That record was supposed to be their boldest leap yet, brighter, faster, almost poppy compared to the cold steel of computer world. They had vocals recorded in multiple languages, a collaboration with producer Trevor Horn in the works, even a finished single called Tour de France that was scheduled for release that summer. Bootlegs of the rough mixes still float around today. Fans swear the original Technopop sounds warmer and more human than anything they eventually released. But when Ralf finally walked back through the studio doors 3 months later, everything changed. He listened once to the Technopop tapes, declared them too commercial, and ordered the master reels shelved. Some say he was shaken by how close he had come to dying and wanted something darker. Others whisper he simply couldn't bear the thought that the album had been finished without his final say-so. Whatever the reason, Technopop vanished. 3 years later, a heavily reworked, stripped-down version came out as Electric Café, and most of the original songs were gone forever. The bike crash did something else, too. It turned Ralph's cycling obsession from hobby into ideology. Meat disappeared from the studio fridge overnight. Everyone was encouraged, quietly required, to ride thousands of kilometers a year. The Tour de France single finally surfaced in 1983, but by then it felt like a ghost track. Beautiful, haunting, and a reminder of what almost was. The others swallowed the loss and kept working. They told themselves this was the price of genius. But deep down, each of them started counting the days until they could walk out with their sanity intact. And one by one, that is exactly what they did.
Wolfgang Flür was the first to break. After 17 years of perfect 16th note precision, he handed Ralf a short letter in 1987 and left Kling Klang forever. No big fight, no screaming match, just a quiet exit through the heavy soundproof door. A few years later, he published a book called I Was a Robot. In it, he described the band's early days as 4 20-something guys chasing girls in shiny suits, then slowly watching every trace of fun get engineered out. He wrote about Ralf ordering them to smile less on stage because it looked too human. The book sold well, and Kraftwerk never mentioned Wolfgang's name again. Karl Bartos held on longer, but by 1990, the silence had become unbearable. They had spent almost a decade releasing exactly one new album, Electric Café, and endless remixes of the same old loops. Karl begged for fresh material, for deadlines, for anything that felt alive. Instead, he got more bicycle talk and another week fine-tuning the brightness of a single square wave. One afternoon, he packed the custom vocoder he had helped design into a suitcase, walked out, and smuggled the robo-voice technology with him. When the remaining members discovered it missing, they simply built another one and pretended nothing had happened. The departures weren't announced, no press release, no farewell tour. The official photos just showed fewer silhouettes. On stage, the empty stations were filled by the robot dummies everyone assumed were gimmicks. Most nights, they actually were the band. Florian Schneider stayed the longest, maybe out of loyalty, maybe because he still believed in the original dream. But by the early 2000s, even he was spending more time sailing and building experimental flutes than sitting in the windowless studio. In November 2008, he simply stopped showing up. Ralf told interviewers Florian had retired to pursue private projects. The truth was quieter and sadder. The co-founder of electronic music had been eased out of his own creation. With every exit, Kling Klang grew colder and more efficient. Ralf replaced human beings with hard drives and hired touring technicians who asked no questions. The fortress was finally perfect. No arguments, no feelings, no compromise. But perfection has a price, and sometimes that price shows up in court.
In 1997, a German producer named Moses Pelham slipped a tiny loop, exactly 2 seconds, of metallic percussion from Kraftwerk's 1977 track Metall auf Metall into a song by rapper Sabrina Setlur. Most people would never notice. Ralf Hütter noticed. He heard it on the radio, stopped his bike in the middle of the road, and decided this was theft on a cellular level. What followed was one of the longest and most expensive copyright battles in music history. For 20 straight years, the case bounced between German courts, the European Court of Justice, and back again. Kraftwerk's argument was simple. Even 2 seconds of their sound, unchanged, belonged to them forever. Pelham's side said sampling 2 seconds at a recognizable speed was fair artistic use. Ralf showed up to hearings in his cycling gear, stone-faced, refusing interviews. Lawyers described his approach as paramilitary. He spent millions of his own money and once told a judge that allowing the sample would be like letting someone steal a single brick from a cathedral and claiming the building was still intact. In 2019, the European Court finally ruled in Kraftwerk's favor. The decision rewrote sampling law across the continent and made headlines worldwide. Most fans celebrated it as a victory for artistic control. Ex-members quietly pointed out the irony. The same man who erased people from photos had just spent 2 decades protecting 2 seconds of Wolfgang Flür's drumming. While the courts dragged on, another fight was brewing closer to home. The men who had built Kling Klang from nothing decided they still had a legal right to the name Kraftwerk. Ralf disagreed. Lawsuits were filed, countersuits followed, and for half a decade, former friends who once shared a single farfisa organ refused to be in the same room. Everything settled out of court in 2019, the same year the sampling war ended. Nobody disclosed the terms, but the old members stopped talking about a reunion, and Ralf kept the keys. By then, the studio itself had begun to feel like a museum no one was allowed to visit. The machines still hummed, the doors stayed locked, and the last original spark was flickering somewhere in the dark. And then, without warning, the man who started it all simply vanished from the picture. Florian Schneider was never the front man, but without him there would be no Kraftwerk at all. He was the quiet one who spoke fluent French, built flutes that sounded like UFOs, and once spent 6 months trying to make a vocoder say merci with the perfect Parisian accent. When he stopped coming to Kling Klang in late 2008, Ralf told the press Florian had chosen to dedicate himself to private musical projects. That was it. No goodbye party, no joint statement, just another silhouette quietly removed from the official photos. For the next 12 years, Florian became a ghost. Friends said he sailed the North Sea alone, lived in a small village near the Dutch border, and refused to speak about the band. He turned down every interview, every Lifetime Achievement Award, every offer to play one last show. Some fans thought he was angry. Others believed he had simply outgrown the machine he helped create. Then, in April 2020, a short announcement appeared on Kraftwerk's website. Florian Schneider had passed away at the age of 73 after a very brief illness. The wording was careful. No details, no mention of cancer, just brief illness. Within hours, the internet filled with rumors. He had kept his diagnosis completely secret, told almost no one, and slipped away exactly the way he had lived for the last decade, silently, on his own terms. Ralf's only public comment was a single sentence. Florian was a sound perfectionist and a very private person. There were no tears on camera, no tribute concert, no unreleased duets suddenly surfacing. The 2022 tour went ahead with a moving moment of silence and a single spotlight on an empty microphone stand. Then the robots kept marching. Today, when the current lineup plays The Man Machine or Computer Love, the backing tracks still contain tiny fragments only Florian knew how to shape. Little breaths of air in the vocoder, a flute note bent just a fraction of a semitone. Fans swear they can still hear him in there, hiding in plain sight. Kling Klang itself is quieter now. The building on Mintrapstrasse was sold years ago. Ralf moved the entire operation to a secret location somewhere outside Düsseldorf. Some say it's just a handful of laptops in a converted barn. Others insist the original custom gear is still running in a basement nobody has seen since 2009. And that's the final twist. The most influential studio in electronic music history might not even exist anymore. Or it might still be humming behind another locked door, waiting for the next impossible sound only one man still knows how to find. So here we are, 55 years later, and the real story of Kling Klang still refuses to sit still. It began as an empty room where 2 students turned newspaper headlines into loops that accidentally changed the world. It grew into a fortress that protected genius and slowly suffocated the people inside it. Albums were born, albums were buried, friendships were erased, 2 seconds of drums were defended for 2 full decades, and in the end, the co-creator of electronic music slipped away with the same silence he always carried. What actually happened inside those walls? A miracle of invention, yes, the birthplace of techno, house, synth pop, and half the sounds you hear in 2025. But also a warning. Absolute control can produce flawless machines and flawless music and leave a trail of human wreckage that never quite gets remixed out of the master tape. Today, Ralf Hütter is the last man standing, still riding his bicycle hundreds of kilometers every week, still tweaking waveforms at 4 in the morning, still refusing to let anyone else open the door. Whether the current Kling Klang is a state-of-the-art lab or just a lonely laptop in a farmhouse, only he knows, and he's not telling. Maybe that's the point. Kraftwerk taught us that humans can sound like robots. Kling Klang proved that robots can sometimes treat humans the same way. Next time you hear those perfect pulses in a club at 3 in the morning, listen a little closer. Under the grid, behind the vocoder, you might just catch the faint echo of 4 young guys laughing in an empty room before the doors locked for good. Thanks for coming inside with me. If this one hit you, drop a comment with your favorite Kraftwerk moment. I read them all. And if you want more stories that the history books left out, hit subscribe. We've got plenty more locked doors to open. See you in the next one.
Я твой слуга, я твой работник.